After walking away from his family for 15 years, a self-made millionaire unexpectedly crosses paths with his ex-wife at a busy mall. But what happens next changes everything. He discovers that the two teenage boys walking beside her might just be his sons. Can he earn their trust after abandoning them? Will the past be too much to overcome? Tune in to find out how one man faces his past, one step at a time, in this unforgettable story of redemption and second chances. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The mall in Los Angeles was bustling with activity that Saturday afternoon. Families wandered from store to store. Couples laughed as they strolled, and friends chatted eagerly about their weekend plans. Bright lights from the shops reflected off the polished floors, and the sweet aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the salty scent of buttery popcorn. The energy of the place was contagious, making it hard to believe that any one person could be lost in their own world amidst such a crowd. David Porter, a tall man in his mid-40s, stood in the middle of the busy corridor. His sandy hair was neatly combed, and his sharp blue eyes scanned the crowd as he sipped his coffee. He looked every bit the picture of success. Wearing a crisp, expensive suit, David was the very definition of a self-made millionaire. At 46, he had everything he could ever want: wealth, status, and an enviable lifestyle. Yet despite all of this, something inside of him felt hollow. He often felt like a man trapped in a life he had created, unsure of whether it was the life he truly wanted. He walked through the crowd with a calm confidence, his phone in his hand as he checked emails and made quick business calls. As he passed by a jewelry store, his mind wandered to the meetings ahead, to the projects that demanded his attention, and to the empty evenings spent in luxurious hotel suites with no one to share them with. His success had come at a price. He had lost more than he realized when he left behind the life he had once known. "Close the deal and have the paperwork on my desk by Monday," David said into his phone before ending the call. He slipped the phone into his pocket, letting out a deep sigh. The weight of the conversation seemed to settle on him as he continued walking, the noise of the mall fading into the background. He took another sip of his coffee, staring ahead without really seeing anything. But then, something caught his eye. A figure in the distance. A woman. David's heart skipped a beat. His gaze locked onto her, and in that instant, everything around him seemed to freeze. She was walking with two teenage boys, laughing as they pointed at the jewelry displays in the store window. They moved together like a family, sharing an easy, comfortable camaraderie. David's breath caught in his throat. There, in the distance, was Olivia. Olivia Grant, the woman he had once loved, the woman he had walked away from 15 years ago. His feet felt heavy as he stood there frozen in place watching her. Olivia looked just as beautiful as he remembered, but there was something different about her now. She moved with a quiet grace, her deep brown skin glowing under the mall's fluorescent lights, her curly hair falling gracefully to her shoulders. She had a maturity in her expression, a sense of peace and self-assurance that David hadn't seen before. For a moment it felt as if the years had melted away. He could almost hear the memories flood back. Those early mornings they spent together. The quiet conversations in their modest apartment. The shared dreams of a future they never got to build. But those memories were quickly replaced by the painful reminder of how he had left her behind, without warning, without looking back. David's eyes shifted from Olivia to the two boys walking beside her. His breath caught in his throat again as he took in their features. The boys were laughing, clearly enjoying each other's company, but as David looked at them more closely, a strange sensation washed over him. The boys looked familiar. He stared at their faces, his heart pounding in his chest. They had his eyes, his exact shade of green. The same eyes that looked back at him every morning in the mirror. His mind raced, 1,000 questions spinning in his head. Could they be his sons? He had never considered that possibility. He had left Olivia without ever knowing she was pregnant, never thinking there might be a future he would miss out on, overwhelmed by a sudden mix of disbelief and hope. David took a step forward, his feet moving on their own accord. His pulse quickened and his thoughts became a blur. What would he say to Olivia? What would he say to the boys? He didn't know, but he had to go to them. Every step he took felt heavier than the last, as if he were walking through quicksand. He couldn't stop looking at Olivia, unable to tear his eyes away from her, and yet he wasn't sure what to do next. His mind screamed at him to go up to her, to speak to her, to explain himself. But as he approached, the weight of the past seemed to press down on him, making his throat tighten. Just as he was about to call out her name, Olivia looked up. Their eyes met across the busy mall. For a moment, the world around them seemed to dissolve, leaving only the two of them standing in that suspended instant. Time seemed to slow as their gazes locked. "David," she murmured, her voice filled with shock, disbelief, and something else. Anger, maybe. Or was it the remnants of a love she had once felt for him? He couldn't tell. All he could do was
stare at her, his mouth suddenly dry, unable to form the words that had been stuck in his throat since the moment he saw her. Eva didn't smile.
She didn't move. Instead, she raised an eyebrow, her body stiffening. Her expression was one of guarded disbelief, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. And then she spoke again, her voice cold. "What do you want, David?" David stood there, frozen, a swirl of emotions washing over him. He wanted to apologize, to explain why he had left, but the words seemed to be trapped somewhere deep inside him. Her gaze flickered to the boys, who had now turned to look at David with confusion written on their faces. They must have noticed the sudden change in their mother's demeanor. Olivia raised her hand, silencing the boys before turning back to David. "I don't believe it," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "After all these years, you just show up?" The boys looked at each other, unsure of what was going on. David's heart sank as he realized how much time he had lost, how much he had missed. The boys, his sons, had no idea who he was. David stood there, the weight of the years pressing down on him. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as Olivia's words echoed in his mind. She had every right to be angry. After all, he had walked away without a word, leaving her to carry the burden of their life together alone. And now, here she was, standing before him, with two teenage boys who looked so much like him. It took his breath away. His mind was racing, but all he could do was stand there, a man who had spent so many years chasing wealth and success, yet now found himself lost in the very thing he had once taken for granted: family. The boys continued to look at him with confused expressions, but there was something else in their eyes, something that David couldn't quite place. They were unsure, maybe even afraid, but beneath that there was a flicker of curiosity. They were searching for answers, just as he was. But what answers could he give them? He had never imagined that his decision to leave would lead to this moment, this reckoning with the past he had hoped to escape. Eva's sharp gaze was fixed on him now. She folded her arms across her chest, her posture defensive as she spoke again, her voice softer but no less firm. "Do you think you can just walk back into our lives after all these years? Just because you see us here doesn't mean you get a free pass, David. We moved on. We had to. We had to survive without you." David flinched at the truth in her words. He hadn't even considered what it would be like for her, to have to raise two boys on her own. He had told himself that leaving was the only way for him to pursue his dreams, to build the life he wanted. But now, looking at Olivia, seeing the strain in her eyes and the subtle lines that marked the years of hardship she had faced without him, he realized just how selfish he had been. He had left because he couldn't see beyond his own desires. The life he wanted, the success he craved, had seemed more important than the one thing that could have truly given his life meaning: a family. And now it was too late to change any of it. Olivia's voice broke through his thoughts, sharp and cold. "You walked away when we needed you the most, David. You left me pregnant, alone, and vulnerable. And now, after all this time, you expect me to just forgive you? To let you back in like nothing happened?" David opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He didn't know how to explain the years of self-delusion, the lies he had told himself to justify his actions. He had convinced himself that he had made the right choice. But as Olivia stood before him, her eyes filled with pain and anger, he realized how deeply wrong he had been. He had abandoned her without a second thought, believing that the pursuit of success was the key to happiness. But now, happiness seemed so far out of reach, a distant memory he couldn't grasp. "I never knew," David said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never knew you were pregnant. I left without knowing, without thinking. I never meant to hurt you, Olivia, but I did. And for that, I'm sorry." Eva looked at him, her expression unreadable. Her gaze flickered to the boys who were now standing a few steps behind her, clearly uncomfortable with the tension between the two adults. She sighed, her breath shaky as she spoke again. "I don't expect an apology, David. It's too late for that. You can't just show up and expect everything to be okay. You don't get to rewrite the past, and you don't get to pretend that the last 15 years didn't happen." David felt his heart shatter as the truth sank in. Eva was right. He couldn't undo the damage he had caused. He had spent so many years chasing after things that didn't matter, only to find that the one thing that truly mattered, family, was something he had lost forever. The boys didn't know him, didn't understand who he was. They had grown up without him, without a father, and now they stood in front of him as strangers. He took a step forward, his hand outstretched as if to reach for them, to somehow bridge the gap that had grown between them over the years. But Olivia stepped back, her eyes narrowing with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "No, David," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to come back and ask for forgiveness. Not after what you did." David's heart sank, and for the first time in years he felt the full weight of his actions. He had walked away from the one thing that could have given his life meaning, the one thing he had taken for granted. And now, standing in front of Olivia, he realized that he had thrown it all away. "I understand," David said, his voice heavy with regret. "I can't take back what I did. I know that. But if there's any chance at all, that I could be part of their lives, I'd like to try. I need to try." Olivia's expression softened just a little, but her resolve remained strong. She looked at David for a long moment, as if weighing his words, but then she spoke again, her voice firm. "This isn't about you, David. This is about them. I can't make any promises. If they want to meet you, if they want to know you, I won't stop them. But you don't get to force yourself into their lives. Not after everything that's happened." David swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. He had expected rejection, but hearing it from Olivia, the woman he had once loved, was harder than he had imagined. The pain of it washed over him, in waves, but he knew he deserved it. "I'll wait," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "If they ever want to know me, I'll be here. I won't go anywhere." Olivia nodded, her eyes softening just a fraction. "We'll see," she said, softly, before turning to walk away. "Just remember, David, this is about them, not you." As she walked away with the boys, David stood frozen in place, his heart heavy with the weight of his past. He watched as Olivia wrapped her arms around Isaac and Luke, pulling them close. They had no idea who he was, but for the first time David saw a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small glimmer of possibility in a life he had almost given up on. As he watched them disappear into the crowd, David made a promise to himself. He wasn't going anywhere. He would wait no matter how long it took. And maybe, just maybe, he could find a way back into their lives. Days passed after that painful encounter at the mall, and David Porter couldn't shake the feeling that his world had shifted. He had spent so many years convincing himself that his success was the key to happiness. But standing in front of Olivia and his sons, seeing the lives they had built without him, he realized just how empty his achievements had been. For the first time in years, he felt a weight in his chest, a longing for something that success could never fill. David replayed the moment over and over in his mind. Olivia's words echoed in his head. "You don't get to rewrite the past." She was right. He couldn't undo the years he had lost, the years he had chosen ambition over family. He had abandoned them, and no amount of money could erase that betrayal. The realization weighed heavily on him, but he also knew that there was one thing he could still do. He could try to make things right. Even if Olivia had closed the door, maybe there was still a way in for him, through his sons. The phone call came unexpectedly, just a week after the encounter at the mall. The number wasn't familiar, but something in his gut told him to pick up. "Hello?" David answered, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "David," came the calm voice on the other end. It was Olivia. Her tone was neutral, but there was something else in it, a hint of something deeper. "The boys, they want to meet you." David's heart skipped a beat. "They do?" he asked, barely able to believe what he was hearing. "They have questions," Olivia replied, her voice softer now but still guarded. "I can't promise anything, but they want to know. I'm doing this for them, not for you. If you hurt them, David, I won't forgive you." David swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. "I understand," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I won't hurt them, I promise." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Olivia spoke again. "Good. I'll see you then." And with that, she hung up. David sat there for a moment, staring at his phone. His heart was racing, his mind a whirl of emotions. A chance to make things right. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew he couldn't let this slip away. He had waited for this moment, and now that it was here, he couldn't afford to mess it up. The next Saturday, David found himself sitting at a small cafe near Griffith Park, his hands fidgeting nervously around a cup of coffee. His mind raced as he replayed every conversation he'd ever had with Olivia, every mistake he had made, every regret he had carried with him. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew he had to be ready for anything. When Olivia and the boys finally arrived, David stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. They walked toward him, Olivia leading the way, her expression unreadable. The boys were beside her, looking at David with curious eyes, but there was an underlying wariness in their gazes. They were cautious, as anyone would be meeting a stranger, especially one who claimed to be their father after all these years. David took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say, but now that the moment was here, the words felt hollow. He looked at the boys, his sons, for the first time since they had been born. "I'm David," he said, his voice shaky. "I'm your father." There was a long pause. Isaac, the older of the two boys, looked at him with cautious eyes. His expression was hard to read, but there was no mistaking the skepticism in his gaze. "I'm Isaac," he said, his voice soft but firm. "This is my brother Luke." David nodded, his heart aching as he looked from Isaac to Luke. Luke, who was a few years younger, gave a small nod but didn't speak. His eyes too held a mixture of curiosity and caution, but he didn't seem as open as Isaac. David's breath hitched as the reality of the situation hit him. These boys, his boys, didn't know him. They didn't know the man who had walked away from them. They had grown up without him, and he had no right to expect them to just accept him. Isaac, always the more outspoken of the two, spoke first. "Why did you leave?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mix of hurt and confusion. "Why didn't you want us?" David's heart cracked at the question. He had been waiting for it, but hearing it from Isaac, seeing the pain in the boy's eyes, made it all the more real. I thought I needed more," David said, his voice breaking. "More success, more freedom. I thought leaving was the only way to get what I wanted. But I was wrong. I see that now. I was selfish." Isaac looked at him for a long moment, his expression softening slightly. David could see the hesitation in his eyes, the flicker of hope that maybe this wasn't a lie, that maybe this man before him was telling the truth. But the trust had been broken long ago, and it would take more than words to rebuild it. Luke, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "Mom said you left because you didn't want us," Is that true? His voice was quieter, less confrontational but still full of confusion. David's throat tightened as he fought to hold back tears. No, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't know about you. I didn't know I had sons. If I had known, things would have been different. I can't change the past, but I would give anything to have been there for you. The boys exchanged glances. There was still a wall between them, but David could see a slight shift. Isaac's eyes softened just a little, and Luke looked at him with less suspicion than before. David wasn't sure where this conversation would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to give up. I can't undo what I did. David continued, his voice gaining strength. But if you ever want to know me, I'm here. I won't go anywhere. I'll wait, and I'll be patient. Olivia, who had been standing quietly nearby, watched the exchange with a mixture of hope and caution. She hadn't said much, but David could feel her eyes on him, waiting to see if he would keep his promise. We'll take it one step at a time, Olivia said softly, her voice almost gentle now. But remember, David, this is about them, not you. David nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I know, he said quietly, his heart swelling, with a mix of hope and uncertainty. And as the conversation continued, David knew that this was only the beginning. He had a long way to go to earn their trust. But for the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of purpose. He was ready to face the consequences of his past, to do whatever it took to make things right for Isaac, Luke, and Olivia. It wouldn't be easy, but it was the only path forward. As the meeting came to an end, the boys said little, but David could see the beginning of something in their eyes. They didn't know him yet, but maybe, just maybe, they would one day. And that was enough for now. David left the cafe that day with a renewed sense of hope, determined to take the next step, one at a time. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of it. Weeks passed, and Porter found himself in a world he had never expected to return to, one filled with small moments, shared laughter, and tentative connections. The life he had been living, the one of endless meetings, expensive cars, and luxurious hotel rooms, seemed hollow in comparison to the simple, yet profound moments he now found himself in. Each time he met Isaac and Luke, each conversation, each gesture was a new beginning, a chance to make up for the years he had lost. But it was clear that forgiveness would take time, and trust would not be rebuilt overnight. David spent hours reflecting on the past, the choices he had made, the opportunities he had let slip through his fingers. He thought of the millions he had accumulated, the deals he had closed, the trophies and accolades he had received, but none of it felt as meaningful as sitting down to share a cup of coffee with Isaac and Luke. None of it could fill the emptiness he felt in his heart when he thought of the time he had missed, the memories he had never made. It wasn't easy. Every conversation with the boys felt like walking on fragile ground. At first, Isaac and Luke had been distant, unwilling to open up. They had questions, of course, but most of them were guarded and carefully chosen. They weren't sure if they could trust him, and who could blame them? They had spent their whole lives without a father, without David. Now he was showing up, trying to fit into a role he had neglected for far too long. It wasn't just the boys who had to adjust, it was David too. He had to relearn how to be a father, how to show up in ways that mattered, how to be present in their lives without overwhelming them. At first, their meetings were brief, awkward, a cup of coffee here, a walk in the park there. David would ask, about school, about their hobbies, their friends. He would listen intently, trying to understand who they had become in the years without him. Isaac was passionate about history, often talking excitedly about ancient civilizations and his dream of becoming an architect. Luke, on the other hand, had a love for music that David could only admire from a distance. His passion for the piano was something David had never shared, but he respected it nonetheless. As the days turned into weeks, David started to feel the first flickers of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was subtle at first. A fleeting smile from Luke when David asked about his music. A look of approval from Isaac when they discussed his architectural aspirations. The walls between them began to come down, bit by bit. It wasn't a flood of emotions, but rather a slow, steady stream of progress that David could feel in the way they interacted with him. One afternoon, David met Isaac and Luke at a small park near their school. Isaac had brought a soccer ball, and despite the initial awkwardness, they began to play. At first, David wasn't sure how to act. Should he be the serious father, guiding them, teaching them? Or should he just let them lead, allow them the space to show him who they were? But then, as he fumbled to kick the ball, tripping over it and landing awkwardly on the grass, Luke burst out laughing. It wasn't a mocking laugh, but a genuine, carefree one. It was the kind of laugh that came from someone who didn't have a care in the world, someone who had finally let go of the weight of the past. And in that moment, something shifted. David laughed too, a deep, rich laugh that surprised even him. It felt good, freeing, like he had finally let go of the guilt and shame that had been weighing him down for so long. They spent hours kicking the ball around, and for the first time in years, David felt like a father again. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was simply present, sharing in the joy of the moment with Isaac and Luke. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the field, Olivia appeared, watching them from a distance. She was sitting on a bench, her arms crossed, her eyes soft as she observed the three of them together. David could see the change in her too. The hard lines in her face, the ones that had once been etched with bitterness and anger, were starting to soften. She hadn't said much in the last few weeks, but David knew she was watching, waiting to see if he would keep his promise. And as he looked at her, a flicker of hope stirred within him. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something real. After the game, David walked over to Olivia, who stood up as he approached. The air between them felt lighter, less tense than it had in weeks. She gave him a small nod, a gesture that spoke volumes. "Thank you for today," Olivia said, her voice quieter than usual, but warm. "They needed this. They needed to see you like this." David nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I needed it too," he replied honestly. He hesitated for a moment before adding, "I know I can't fix everything, Olivia, but I'm not going anywhere. Not this time. I'll keep showing up. For them, for you, for us." Olivia studied him for a moment, her gaze piercing. There was a long silence before she spoke again. "We'll see," she said softly, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and caution. "Just keep showing up, David. That's all they need." David smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. It wasn't a promise of reconciliation, but it was a start, a small but significant step forward. As he left the park that evening, walking alongside Isaac and Luke, David couldn't help but feel a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. He had no idea where this journey would take him or if he would ever be able to fully make up for the years he had lost. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to give up. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and he knew there would be setbacks, but he was finally ready to take responsibility for his past and build something new. For the first time in years, David felt like he was part of something real, something that mattered. And as he walked alongside his sons, he realized that, no matter what happened next, he had found the one thing that had always eluded him, a sense of belonging. Over the next few weeks, David continued to show up. He attended soccer games, parent-teacher meetings, and school events. He was there, present in a way he had never been before. Isaac began to open up more, sharing stories about school and his dreams for the future. Luke, too, started to show a bit more of himself, his love for music shining through in small moments. And with each passing day, the bond between them grew stronger, one small step at a time. David knew the road ahead would be long, and there would be many hurdles to overcome. But for the first time in years, he felt hope. And with that hope, he was ready to face whatever came next, because now, for the first time in his life, he had a family to fight for.